what are the keys to maximizing business value? At the end of the day, there's three keys, and we're keeping things in threes, right? And that's intentional, but it's also just reality. So within these three keys, the first key is really the first two keys are intrinsic to the business, right? And then the third is external to the business. So investor, when they come and they look at investing in a founder entrepreneur run business, almost all of their questions are going to come back to one of two things: scalability, that is the business's capacity for growth in the future. It could be linear, could be exponential, all right? But it's always within the context of the continued investment that's required to achieve that growth. So if you have manufacturing company A and you're bursting at the seams, all right, and you're running 3 shifts, and you're turning away customers, well, someone looking inside at the business says, wow, I got to go buy more equipment. I got to get more people. Maybe we have to get a new location. That requires a lot of investment, right? Whereas if the exact same business, you still have room for a second shift, and if you've planned correctly to be able to grow, that's going to be a more valuable business. Let me give you a specific example. So we recently did an exit readiness assessment with a company in the pharma distribution space. The company had really explosive growth during the pandemic because they were able to secure hard to find drugs for their customers. And so their revenue just skyrocketed. However, this emphasis on securing these hard to find drugs meant that when the supply chain crisis abated, their sales just reverted basically back to where they had been. And so what they realized was, wow, we have a capacity for more revenue than we're doing on a regular basis, but we haven't built the business to be able to take advantage sustainably, for that higher revenue ceiling. And really, as we worked with them, what they realized was that they had a problem with their revenue generation engine, and it had to do with turnover in their sales team, that they were just having too much staff churn, that they couldn't really grow unless there was, an outward crisis that was creating that growth. And so it wasn't sustainable. And so in order to sustain revenue growth, we really recommended to them, and they began implementing that they needed to raise the base compensation for their sales team because it wasn't competitive. And then they also needed to change their incentive plans to really specifically incentivize their employees to focus on selling a more consistent base of those routine products and not have things so heavily weighted on those hard to find drugs. So just by changing their sales team, they could actually create more scalability in their business. And so the second intrinsic key is the transferability of value from one owner to the next, right? And so this is about, I love watching the Olympics and all the track and field events. And it's always, you hold your breath for a second when they're doing the relays and they pass the baton, because there's risk in dropping the baton. And that's the same thing in a business transition. The transferability risk is something that investors are really concerned with, and with good reason. But the good news is transferability risk is something that can be managed downward by a business owner. It's something that you have control over and that you can work to mitigate and reduce. The third key is really external to the business, and that is the macro market conditions that exist in and around a business, its ecosystem, its macro and micro environment. And one mistake that business owners make is they think that, well, because the market is sort of external to my business, that I don't need to really understand it or pay attention to it, or that I can't influence it. And that's just not true. On the contrary, right? A home builder can choose to build a house on sand or on a rock. So a business owner can choose to build their business into a particular environment or across particular environments.